This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And for those of you who listen to us regularly, you know that we talk about a journey. We're all on a journey in life. And some of us walk through that journey with a blindfold on, which is awfully scary because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get to where you want to be? Today, my guest is Serge Prengel, and he is, can I call you a mindfulness expert?
Yeah.
Okay.
I always have trouble with the word expert. So I have kind of a mixed relationship with it or ambivalence about the word. But yes, other than that.
Well, I know recently a lot of us are trying to be more mindful of who we are, what we do, how we're perceived in this world. Um, and, uh, I know I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and what was acceptable then, all of a sudden is no longer acceptable. And I find that I too have to be aware of certain words that I use or things that I relate to because the millennials and the younger generations, they just look at us as we're rude and crude. So mindfulness, I think, is really important. So tell me, Serge, what got you on this path?
Yeah. So, I'm a therapist, and a big part of the why people go to therapy, are interested in therapy, is that sense of know yourself, the know yourself better, be conscious, be aware. And a lot of mindfulness is also about be aware, don't be sleepwalking, going through the maze with your blindfold on and trying to kind of teeter and find your way, and all kinds of pitfalls are happening. So if you have your eyes wide open, you have your ears wide open, then you're more able to see where you're going. And so that's that convergence of interest toward how you be more alive, how can you be more present.
So, one of the things that I know is very prevalent in today's society, we walk around with earbuds in our ears. Um, we are constantly looking at our phone. If not our phone, we're on our computer and we're having conversations with people while we are multitasking. But if we're multitasking, are we really aware of what's going on around us?
Mm. Yeah. So, obviously we're not that aware of it. We're just, we have, it's amazing, like there's an amazing capacity of the human minds to be doing several things at the same time. And so we're aware enough, and that's how it can work. But at the same time, we are not as fully aware as we could be. And part of it is actually something that's a strategy for not being bored, for wanting to have some stimulation. And that's, we can talk about it as saying, oh, it's bad. But really, it's an amazing function of the human mind to be able to absorb a lot of information, to be able to process a lot of information. So in some ways, it's like you have a supercomputer and you're using it to run some little measly little program. You say, wow, I have all of this capacity. Why don't I do more with it? And so you do this and this and this and that, and it's humming, and oh wow, yeah, I'm using this computer. And that's what we do with our mind. So if you take a punitive approach to it, it's like saying, okay, so you have this amazing machine, use only a tenth of its capacity. And so you're kind of resisting it. Why would I only use a tenth of its capacity? Why would I deprive myself all this stimulation? And so the approach to mindfulness that's based on depriving people doesn't work. The idea is, okay, so you want, something, that gives you a sense of stimulation, a sense of what you can do. So use your curiosity to deepen whatever you're doing, you know. And if what you're doing is really boring, can you actually then decide to do something else? But use your conscious mind to give yourself consciously better experiences of life, instead of doing it in a passive way, where the passive resistance is when you're doing something, you start doing something else and something else and something else. And you have kind of a lower level stimulation, lower level enjoyment of your capabilities.
You know, I think you're describing me, which is a little scary right now. You know, my husband complains that when I sit down to watch TV with him, that I'm constantly doing something else, whether it's checking my phone, playing a game on my phone, reading my email, whatever. And I tried to explain to him, specifically last night, we had this conversation. I said, when you ask me to sit down and watch TV with you, it's usually something that you want to watch on TV. And if I don't get drawn into it right away, I am bored, okay? But I want to spend whatever time that is in your presence, because we both are working very long hours. And so if we have that hour or so time zone, it's like, okay, I want to be here. But if I'm bored, I'm really not there, because my mind will wander. And so I said to him, it's not that I don't want to be with you, but I just don't want to do what you're doing at the time. And there's a difference.
Yeah.
And so we are now going to start working on that. It's like, okay, instead of sitting down and watching a TV program, maybe we will go into the dining room and have a conversation, or do something that is not totally distracting him and boring me, so I'm distracted by something else. And to me, I think that is mindfulness, because we're thinking it through. Am I on the right path?
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is a perfect example. This is such a great example, because, you know, like the punitive way would be to force yourself to say, oh, you know, yeah, I'm bad for being distracted. And so I'm going to do, and so you force yourself to do something you don't want to do. Okay.
Right.
And or he forces himself to do something else, you know. And you know, this is about, you know, the facing reality. And facing reality, there's conflicting needs. You know, there's and you'd notice very nicely that while there are conflicting needs, there's an intersection, something that is a need that you both have and value, having a moment together.
Right.
And sitting together, doing something together. Okay, so you could then compromise and say, okay, so if you want to watch TV, I'm going to sit, you know, on the couch next to you, but I'm going to be doing my games or whatever. We won't be doing the same thing, but we will be together. And that's a reasonable compromise.
Sure.
But, you know, say, yeah, but can we actually do something that we both enjoy? Wonderful, you go one step further. So what's mindfulness there is, it's not about forcing you to do something you don't want to do, but is seeing the problem and then facing it.
So that can help all of us in this pandemic that we're going through, to try to be a little bit more mindful of what is happening around us. Because I think many of us in the last 2 years have isolated our thoughts, because if we don't, then we're only hearing all those bad things out there, and we don't want to hear the bad. And I found this recently with somebody who I interviewed the other day. They said that they have not watched the news or looked at it online for the last 3 months, and they're the happiest they've ever been. And I said, well, that's great, but by not watching the news, do you have any awareness of what is going on around you? And they said, well, yeah, I hear people talking about it. And I said, but the people are talking, do they have the right information? And they throw it back at me. Well, the news doesn't have the right information either. But to me, having this conversation, it was like, but you're totally isolating yourself. You're only mindful to this pigeonhole that you're walking down. So how do we change that attitude?
Well, we can't change people. So that's it's very, very, very hard, or usually pretty much impossible to change people when they don't want to change.
Okay.
So what you do is you simply, oh, okay, yeah, you're that way. Here I am. Is this something that is that is a problem when you're in connection with this person or not? If it's not a problem, you might want, again, if it's somebody you care about, you might want to explain to them why it means something to you to be connected. And but if it's somebody you don't specially care about, why would you change them? But I could imagine, you have somebody who's part of your family, a coworker you're close to, and it's kind of painful to see them, kind of shrinking their universe. And so you might engage them a little bit and to talk and say, well, I see this, and it's kind of, it makes me sad, it makes me scared to see the news, it makes me powerless. But on the other hand, what's good is when I talk about it with other people, I notice that they also feel the same way. And then I feel better because it's not just the news versus me, but I'm able to connect to people and we feel a sense of togetherness. And then suddenly it's no longer me alone against the world, but I have that warm connection of people who feel like me. And I'd like to include you into my circle of people with whom I have a warm connection. Okay.
I love that. And that's an easy conversation to have.
Yeah.
Because you're not telling them they're wrong and you're right. You're just
right.
inviting them in.
Yeah.
So you've been a therapist, and I'm assuming you've been a therapist. This was something that you chose to do when you were very young, correct?
No.
No.
It was actually a career change.
So what did you do before being a therapist?
I had a small advertising agency.
Okay.
I've always been creative, and I always liked ideas, and I always liked, the sense of finding ways to get people to see things differently. So, advertising was a great way to use my creativity to help people see things differently. And then at some point I thought, you know what, it's interesting to have people see products differently, but I'd rather have them see life differently and see themselves differently and have a sense of possibility and growth and opening. And that's where I shifted.
Interesting. So I can see there's a correlation in both occupations very easily because, in advertising, you're listening to what people want, you're taking those ideas and trying to sell it back to them. And I've been through therapy quite a bit in my life. And there are therapists that will show you what is, but then ask you, what do you want to do with this? How do you see it? Which I think those are the best therapists. My first introduction to therapy, I think I was 15 or 16 years old. And I remember being told exactly who I was supposed to be. And I walked out of his office and I said, that's not me. And it never will be. And it took me a long time to seek out a good therapist. But talk to me about the difference, because we have a lot of people now today who are going into personal coaching. There's a personal coach, there's the therapist. What is the real difference between the two of you besides your educational background?
So I like to describe what I do. I mean, I describe it as therapy, but I also describe it as coaching in the sense that I like to like the thing I dislike about the word therapy is it's a word that comes from, the concept of medical things. So you have, you're ill and you're cured. And therapy is literally a word that's about curing illnesses. And, most people really, have problems dealing with the complexities of life, as opposed to being sick in a way that you can have a physical illness. So I like the idea that the work of the therapist is actually to coach people into using their resources, to better function in the world in a way that they enjoy. Now, what happens is that in order to call yourself a therapist, you have to meet certain requirements that
Sure.
are somewhat different in each state, but they're very strict requirements. Whereas in order to be a coach, anybody can hang a shingle and call themselves a coach.
Right.
So you can be a therapist and function as a coach. You can have the kind of attitude that's more of a coaching attitude, or you can simply be somebody who says, I want to give you advice and I'm calling myself coach, or who has studied coaching. I'm not trying to say, but it's a different training.
Absolutely.
So the training as a therapist is to pay attention to, change at a deeper level, the complexities of the human mind. And I believe it helps, especially in the sense of paying attention to trauma. So maybe to me, the biggest distinction that having a therapist training is something that enables you to see the complexities of trauma that we all have. Even though trauma is a big word, it's actually something that's widely shared. And that, enables you to understand how to change at a deeper level.
Well, and you're right. We've all experienced some form of trauma in our life, and probably more than once. And some of us try to bury that trauma. We don't want to deal with it. And then it comes back in front of us days, months, years later. And we've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years, where people are now questioning, if that happened to you 10 years ago, why didn't you react 10 years ago? Why are you reacting today? And I truly understand that, because I have a son who experienced something about 15 years ago, and he was so embarrassed by it. He hid it. He hid it for 15 years. And this past spring, something happened that triggered it. And out of the blue, he was experiencing post-traumatic stress. And there are people who have said he probably never experienced it, because why did he wait 15 years? And I said, number one, it's not for me to question him. If he says he has, but I can understand it, because knowing what he went through was something as a young teenager he would not have wanted to share. So do you get those questions from others as well, that, trauma, you either react to it now or it never happened?
Yeah, and it's very painful to see, as you're describing in the case of your son, but so many people get that sense of you're faking it, you're imagining it, and that's not true. I mean, what trauma is essentially is not just the big fancy stuff, like trauma comes from, you go to the ER, the emergency room, and there's a trauma unit. People have been in a big car accident, those
Right.
kinds of things. So imagine trauma, imagine bells and whistles. But essentially, the context in which I and many people talk about trauma these days is to say just about anything that your mind is not able to process. at the time it happens, or you don't have the resources to process it, is trauma. It's unfinished business.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So for some people, and it takes, like a major catastrophe for something to register as unfinished business. For some people, and again, depending on the circumstances, it's something that to other people wouldn't be that big and registers. Okay. And so you have somebody, who was impacted, and somebody else says, but I wasn't. Well, yeah, but it's not, like it's what it does to you, to your nervous system, to the circumstances, everything plays together. It's a perfect storm. So when it happens, when trauma happens, basically, it's like a little, think of it as like a little nugget, a little capsule that's isolated, that unprocessed. The brain has neurons that connect with each other. It's all connectivity. And trauma is something that you cannot process. So imagine like you have this little nugget that doesn't have connections to it. Okay. And so when something happens that reminds you of it, it kind of triggers and goes right bing into that little nugget. And that little nugget is not connected to other parts of the brain. So when that happens to you, you relive the intensity of the trauma. Okay.
Yes.
And the intensity of the trauma, you're in a basic fear mode where you don't have access to your mindful capacities. So at that moment, you could be, even if you say you're somebody supremely educated and so on, at that moment, you might not have many words to express it. You might not be able to say something. You might be totally so ashamed because of it, that you absolutely, kind of crunch up and don't open up and don't talk about it. Okay, that's what trauma is. It's that little nugget that's so insulated that you don't behave like you normally would. And that's why it's so helpful to know about trauma, to say, okay, so when people, in a way, the more odd somebody functions, the more not normal it is, the more it tells you that it's happening because it's inside that little nugget of trauma.
Very, very interesting. And that's why I love having individuals like you on Avoid the Maze, because so many of us don't understand all these little things that are happening around us. And we question ourselves, is it only me? And the reality of it is, it's not only me or you. All of us experience these things, but we experience them differently. And that doesn't make them good or bad. I feel that the more we communicate and people understand who we are and why we do certain things, and it doesn't mean, standing up in front of a group and speaking for 2 hours, giving your bio, but it's letting them understand certain things that might make you a little different, or observe things differently. And I just think that understanding the trauma part is important. I read something not too long ago that some of us actually remember years later birth trauma. I can't imagine that. I don't remember anything really about myself other than the pictures I've seen, but they say it's a real thing.
Well, see, when we use the word remember, remember, we think of it in the context of remembering words, logical things. And so from that place, no, you don't remember. But if you think about the trauma is something that is not so much encoded in words, but it's encoded in the connections of the cells of the body and in a pre-verbal way. So when you have something age 10, for instance, age 5, not even talking about, before birth or at birth, what's happening is the information is not encoded in the language part of your brain, but it's encoded in terms of how your body is reacting to it. So you might have, when the stimulus comes in, the trigger comes in, you have that body posture or something that's a posture of fear. But you're not able to put words to it. Okay. And so as you deal with trauma, it's about going beyond the words and going into that physical experience of it. And then as you access the physicality of your experience, then you can start to put words to it. And so same thing for something that would happen at a much, much earlier age. It's not the words, but it's encoding, finding the encoded physicality. And then as you stay with it and experience it, finding the words for it that help you conceptualize it.
An amazing science that we are all involved in. And most
Yeah.
of us have no concept of where these thoughts are coming from or actions are coming from. Do you recommend if somebody, says, I'm feeling something, don't know what it is, my mind is constantly wandering, I need to find myself. And I know that's a big interpretation, find myself. Do you think therapy is something that they're asking for? Or do you think they're just using words that they're confused on who they may be?
So, therapy, yes, it's always very helpful. But generally, I want to maybe use what you were saying before to put it in the context, that it's very nice that we started talking about trauma. Okay. And so you start to the idea that, okay, if you get a little confused, if you get pulled in many directions, I want to do this, but I'm not doing it. I'm not sure what I want. And, I'm not sure, who I am, or any of those questions are wonderful entry points into a process of self-discovery. And of course, you can go to therapy, but you can also do it on your own or with friends. And mindfulness, that's where mindfulness comes about, because, self-discovery is not necessarily just talking and talking and talking about stuff. It's really kind of saying, okay, so what am I feeling? What am I, and what's coming up? I stay there. So I call my practice active pause, because the central point of any mindful exploration is to take a pause. But that pause is not the same thing as what happens when you pause a video or pause a recording. When you pause a video or recording, it continues the same way once you start it. As a human being, when you pause, you go inside, something happens. You're not the same, after the pause as you were before. So the active pause is a moment where you have that little inquiry, okay? And so you have that question, you say, somebody tells you, I'm not sure who I am, I want to find myself, and so on. You say, okay, great. So take a pause, okay? What are you right now? What's happening inside, okay? And so as you put your attention toward what's happening inside, you shift your attention away from that, whirl of thoughts and concepts. I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm finding myself, I don't know who I am. Okay, let's take a pause. What's happening inside? I'm noticing, oh, wow, I'm noticing, well, there's a little tension here. There's a little something, a little something in my belly. Okay, what is that? Okay. As you do that, you shift from that whirlwind of thoughts to get, you know what? And so I may not have an answer right now about, oh, I want to become a teacher or want to become an airplane pilot. But suddenly I have a concept of, oh, you know what? I feel something inside. Oh, so it's like almost, I feel, therefore I exist. That the whole thing of I sing, therefore I am. So it's like, but you're in the concept world. I feel, oh, now I have a proof that I exist. There's something inside. It's not just an idea machine. I have legs, I have a breath, I'm a human being. I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm hungry, you know, and so that anchors you. Okay.
So as I'm sitting here listening to you, um, I'm thinking about certain things,
Mhm.
as our minds do, and it's making me realize that when I made a change 10 years ago from corporate America to come over to the podcasting world and live on a shoestring, um, I did so because in the corporate world, my stomach, my head, my joints hurt. And it may not have been physical, but there was emotional hurt everywhere throughout my body. And when people would say to me, um, are you happy doing what you're doing? Or do you like your job or whatever? I loved my job itself. I didn't love my environment. And my environment, when I took that pause, didn't realize I did it, but when I took that pause and realized I hurt, I could then relate it to what was making me hurt. It wasn't the actual work. It wasn't my students. I loved my students. I didn't want to leave them. I felt if I left corporate America, I was deserting them. But again, I had to take that pause and think about them, me, my family. So I think a lot of us do these things without being aware of it. But now if we become more mindful of it, we probably can keep ourselves healthier.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's beautiful when you say that, these are, it's not like people who practice, mindfulness, who do, the active pause that I recommend, this invented something. It's something that human beings have the capacity to do. So what it is about is simply to do it in a more systematic way, as opposed to avoiding it and letting it happen by accident. But yeah, it's a human function.
I love,
And that what you're describing, you're describing the aches and pains. When there's a phrase psychosomatic, psychosomatic, people, sometimes say, oh, it means it's fake because it's all in the mind. But what psychosomatic means is you have something that's a discomfort, emotional, psychological, and it has impact on the body. And how? So let's say, for instance, you're tense. Okay, so you say tense is something that's emotional. Well, when you're tense, what's happening is your shoulders are tight, for instance. Your neck is tight, your shoulders are tight. And so if you stay in that way much of the time, then your muscles here in the neck and in the shoulders are going to be tight and are going to give you headaches and are going to, influence on your posture, and you're going to have back pains.
right.
Okay. So yeah, it's not in the mind. What's happening, your relationship to the world is reflected in your emotions, but your emotions affect your posture. And your posture is then going to affect your muscles, and that's where you're going to get that back pain and that headache.
Well, this has been quite interesting. So how can our listeners find you if they want more information about you, Serge?
So I have a website that I call Active Pause at activepause.com.
Okay.
And
And
sometimes when people say pause, if you spell it in a dictation thing, it's written PAWS, and it's obviously not that.
right. Yeah, it's not the paws of our dog or our cat walking all over us. Well,
No.
I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I'm hoping our listeners have gotten, some valuable information. I know it certainly has helped me. Um, I'm always looking for new ways of relating to myself so I'm better with the people around me. So I think you made me a little bit better today, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I really appreciate being invited into the maze.
Thank you. Have a great
Okay.
day now. Bye-bye.
Bye.